everybody, and welcome back to Crafts and Crimes, where we discuss true crime, films based on those true crimes, while we make stuff. Now, I have to apologize, I missed a week. I underestimated, but this week's case is a doozy and has a lot of information, so I wanted to make sure I had the time to really investigate everything, get notes organized, and then watch both the films for it as well. So it took a little bit longer. Plus, as I have said before, I do have a full-time job, so balancing both and trying to get a video out is complicated, and I'm still working out the kinks, but we're here now. And I'm very excited for it. This week, if you watched last week's, get comfortable on my chair here. Excuse me. Last week we did, what did we do last week? Oh boy, I don't even remember now. That's how these are all a blur. One second. Oh, last week we did Anatomy of a Murder. I don't know why that was. There we go. Last week, we did Anatomy of a Murder, which is very fun. And we started this project here, which is my spooky / fun sign that I'm making. That versions of this will also be available at From the Heart Gifts. So this is the sign inspired by practical magic. We're doing the saying at the end, always throw salt over your left shoulder, keep rosemary by your garden gate, plant lavender for luck, and fall in love whenever you can. And so this week, I finished the lettering. Last week we did the first two, and I finished the second two off camera. So we are working on the images. We're going to burn out the images, and then I'm going to do a little bit of painting to add some color to it. And then I will seal it and attach toppers so that it can be hung. So we're going to work on that. This is heating up. It's almost done. So we can start that. And then, like I said, this week we are doing, I don't know if I actually said, I said last week at the end we're doing the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, and the film The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which there's actually two of them. The original 1976 version, and then a weird semi-sequel. Well, I guess it is a sequel, but it's under the same name. It's not like two, it's just the same name, in 2014. So we're going to talk about those, and it took me a while. I read notes on it. I listened to a bunch of podcasts on it, and there's just so much information. It took me a while to decide how I wanted to break it down, because there's each of the cases, each of the attacks, plus there's what happened to the town, plus there's the suspects, and it's unsolved, so we have to go over who the suspects are, and like it's kind of solved but not really, not on paper, but people have their theories. So organizing that took some time, but I am very excited to talk about it and continue to get in. And with the films are more horror based than factual based, although they have their moments where it aligns with the case. It's more of a slasher scary film, so it's kind of there to get us into the spooky season, Halloween season, because even though it is September, these 2 months are Halloween, the next 2 months are Christmas. This is my favorite time of year. I wish we could just like repeat September through January all the time. I know that's impractical, whatever. I just like all of it. Anyway, so let us get started. My sources, of course, Wikipedia helped me break it down, just get the feel for the film, for the case. And then I listened to the Dark Histories podcast with Ben Cutmore. True Crime Guys had a two-parter. Dark Histories was a two-part as well. And then Anthology of Horror by Spring Heeled Jack and Night of the Horrorphile did a podcast on the film, so that was interesting to listen to, because even they didn't talk about the case that much, just a little bit, but it did go into some details about the film, which was kind of interesting. Okie dokie. So let's get started. So the Texarkana Moonlight Murders is the term coined by the news media, where a series of unsolved murders and violent crimes in around the Texarkana area of spring 1946. So we're going way, well, not way back, I mean, compared to the other ones. It's 1946. So again, I think one of the reasons why it's unsolved is because it happened in 46, where we didn't have as much information on serial killers, and profiles and investigations. Plus, there's not DNA. We're looking at fingerprints by hand. There's no database, so it's going to be, and we don't know, we didn't have as much protocol as like closing off the scene and people just trampling all over everything. So I think those are reasons why it's probably unsolved. Although they did what they could, but they didn't really connect it as fast as they probably would these days. The term, he was called the Phantom Killer or the Phantom Slayer, of course, as coined by the media as well after the third attack. But of course, we know these days we shouldn't really give them nicknames. Just fuels their fire, sort of, at least in this case, kind of. But that's what they do call him, and then they call it, of course, the Moonlight Murders. And it's Texarkana, which it's the sister city, so it's two cities, one in Texas, one in Arkansas. They each have their own police departments, mayors, everything is like separate, but they overlap with the federal building on the state line, so it's the only one that has like that combo. So they are like one city but two cities. And during this time period, I read a couple different facts on the town itself. A lot of people say that it was kind of a rough town. It was a 24-hour city. People, they worked at the defense plant. There was, it was a hustle and bustle. There was a rail station, so there was a lot of people in and out. So it was within the city itself, where there was a lot of populated people, crime was more rampant. They called it Little Chicago. But in other things that I read was that even though that part, it was more crime ridden, or like more just because it was more populous, but as you moved out towards the boonies where there's nothing going on, it was still quiet. So they still had that aspect of, we're not going to lock our doors, which is ridiculous. And people just don't, I think we get an idea of that. It's like, oh, it's this town, it's this time where we didn't lock our doors. We're like, well, things still happen. It just didn't get talked about as much, and it didn't, it doesn't get publicized as much, and now we know more, so we should be locking our doors. It's not like that time period was so perfect that they just didn't lock their doors, they just didn't know as much. So now we learn from that and we lock our doors. Not to, of course, blame anybody if you left your door unlocked. Some people they shouldn't be coming in to do these things or kill you or rob you or whatever, but now we just need to be aware and protect ourselves. And then a lot of, within the town, they would run back and forth between state lines to escape, so they would commit a crime on the Texas side, and then they'd run across to the Arkansas side, so there was a lot of evading. So that's good the idea of that is putting, keeping that in mind, the fact that it is a heavier crime area, just so that we know when we're going into the crimes that we just keep that in mind, so that we know what's going on during this time. Because if we have that, I like this. Sorry, I'm using I'm using like a thin, a newer one of my points, and I really like how it's working, so yay. I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so knowing how the town is at the time, it kind of also helps to inform how they do their investigation as well. If they're not used to this. I mean, we also, again, Mindhunter, the start of the BAU, or like the behavioral analysis and behavioral science of profiling, is still in its infancy. So they're not going into these thinking it's a serial killer. That term hasn't even really been coined yet. I don't think it'd been coined. It's not actually coined or termed till later. So I forgot the actual date. But even if it had been coined, it's very, very in its infancy. So it's not like they're really, like, it's not like there's a BAU unit of, Spencer Reid coming in and like reading the scene or whatever, so it's not like they're really prepared for what's gonna happen over these next 4 months. So the attacks happen on weekends. They're all about 3 weeks, each one is about 3 weeks apart, and they happen between February 22nd, 1946 through May 3rd, 1946. Which I find interesting, which we'll get into as we go through the crimes, but I feel like that if it happened nowadays, that there would be a little bit more of investigating around in like surrounding areas, but we'll get there. So here's the first. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to go through each of the attacks and the victims and a couple of the survivors, and then we're going to go through like how the town happened, how the town reacted, some of the rumors and the investigation and the investigators, and then we're gonna go through a couple of the we're gonna go through the suspects and what happened after, and how the town reacted with the suspects as well, and then we'll get into the films. So the first attack was Friday, February 22nd, 1946. Jimmy Hollis, age 25, and his girlfriend. They say girlfriend, but I feel like this one was girlfriend. I feel like this one was actually it was their first date. I thought I read that or listened to that on one of the podcasts. It was the next one that they'd been dating, so I think this was actually their first date. But or they hadn't been dating very long. But she was 19. Jimmy Hollis was a 25-year-old insurance agent at the time of the attack. He was born in 1920, and he lived on State Line Avenue. And of course, his house never exists. He's actually coming out of a marriage. He had just recently gotten divorced, and so he had moved to the area to be an insurance salesman with his brother, and he was starting over. And he would eventually, after all of this, get married, not to Mary, but to somebody else, and have 7 children. He got and have 7 children. So he definitely was able to move on. It takes a while, of course. There's a lot of trauma that happens that I've listened to on one of the podcasts. They talk about how, of course, surviving a trauma like this, I couldn't imagine. So it definitely took a while, but he did survive. And then Mary Jean Larry, did I say Alan? Excuse me, Larry. She was 19 years old, and she lived in East Hooks Courts in Hooks, Texas, when she was attacked. Again, she also had just gotten recently divorced. She got married at 16. She had lied about her age and gotten married to somebody, and to a man, and gotten he went off to war. Ooh, shoot. It's already, I liked this one, but now it's gonna bend on me. All right. Come on. Okay. have another one. I can always switch it out if it doesn't want to work on me. There we go. She had also gotten divorced recently as well. So she had married somebody who went off to war, and they stayed married throughout that. But when he came back, had realized that they were really young when they got married, and they mutually decided to split up. But the fact that they're both divorced comes back later when they're doing the investigation from the attack. So they were on a double date with Jimmy's brother and his date, and they went to go see a late night movie. And then they dropped off his brother and their date and then decided to head out. And he was taking her home, but they stopped by a lover's lane on their way back. Whether or not they were getting busy or making out or just talking, who knows. But they're alone on a dark alley street in the middle of nowhere. It was, okay, so let's see. I have the dimensions, but where they were. So 11:45, 50 feet off of Robinson Road, and 100 yards from the last row of city homes is where they were. So that's, and it's dark, and then within 10 minutes, a man wearing a white cloth mask, like a pillow, kind of like a pillowcase. It's a little different in the films, but with the eye, there's eye holes cut, and I believe she said there's also a mouth hole cut as well. And he appeared at the driver's side door and shone a flashlight in their eyes, and they really weren't sure if it was a prank or if it was a cop telling him to go home. But then Hollis told them he must have had the wrong person, and that's when the attack started. The attacker said, "I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say." So they were ordered out of the driver's side door, and the man ordered Hollis to take off his goddamn britches, which sounds funny now, but this is 1946. And in Texas, so I'm sure it doesn't sound odd back then. Although some places say, I remember him that he would say, "Take off your fucking pants," which that's a little more modern to me. So I think the goddamn britches sounds a little bit more realistic to the time of the attack is, and that's what Hollis said that he said. So he took off his pants. He was trying to rob him. Mary Jean Larry was like, he doesn't have any money. He doesn't have his wallet. He only had like $20. And said that she was lying. You have a purse. And as he complied and took his pants off, Larry said that she heard a crack that went over Hollis's head, and she thought he had been shot, but he had really just hit him with the butt of the gun or his flashlight, and it was so loud it sounded like a gunshot. And he went down. He was beaten. He went down, and she tried to show him the wallet. Said like he had only like $20 on him, and they didn't really have any money. And then he ordered her to stand and told her to run, and initially she started to run. And this is where it's so creepy too. It's not like that he's just, well, this is the first attack, so he's kind of the only really survivor of this part of this kind of attack. I mean, there is one more survivor, but the attack's a little bit different, so we don't really know what happens with the other murders, so this could have happened with them too. But he sounds like he's trying to figure out what he really wants to do with his victims. And he sounds like he's just trying to like play with them. That's not the right term, but like, he likes the control and the power of the scaring them. He tells her to run, and she starts to run towards a ditch, and he tells her to run a different direction. And so she runs up the road, and she sees a car, and she thinks that maybe she'll be able to find like somebody. She's trying to get a hold of somebody, and then realizes that the car is empty. And then that's when she's confronted by the attacker again, and he hits her, and she says that he comes up to her and says, "Why did you run away?" And she said, "You told me to." And he said, "You're a fucking liar," and hits her with the gun. And then he sexually assaults her and attacks her with the barrel of the gun, which is an odd thing to do. I mean, of course it's awful. Even if either way, it's awful that he attacked her, but to do it with an object, it sounds like maybe he couldn't get it up normally, so maybe that was some kind of motivation for the crimes in general. And I don't know, because we don't know actually who like officially did it, so we don't really know his profile after the fact. But it just sounds weird and awful, of course. But for it to not have been, for it to have been an object with this sexual assault, does kind of give some kind of, like, if it happened nowadays, that would definitely be within the profile of to think about as they investigate who it is. Alright, so after the assault, Larry fled on foot, running a half a mile to a nearby house, and she attempted to call a passerby of the residence, but was ignored. And Larry was able to awaken the residents of the house and phone the police. Meanwhile, Hollis had regained consciousness. And this, I have it in my notes. I forgot which podcast or thing I read about it, was that, okay, so she was able to get a hold of somebody to call the police at the house when he had regained consciousness, although I don't even know how he was able to, because he had some he was in the hospital for like 14 days recovering, so it's amazing that he was able to wake up and like get out to the point where to get somebody to save them. But the person who pulled over didn't want them in the car, which, I mean, he didn't have pants on and he was bleeding profusely probably, so I'm sure that was like terrifying to see. But the guy was like, "I don't want you to get blood on the car." So he said, "I'll go and call, you stay here." So he just leaves him at the scene. But luckily she had already gotten a hold of the cops, and they were already on their way, so it didn't really matter at that point. But just seriously, dude, and I know we don't have cell phones at that time, but I could imagine how terrifying or scary that was, like weird to see like somebody on the side of the road. But I guess you could think that maybe it was a hoax. I mean, I know these days you're not going to just pick up somebody randomly, but we also have cell phones we could call. Strange. Just sounds kind of heartless. Like, no, I don't want you to get blood on the floor. I can understand you not wanting, just you thinking it's a hoax, but just because you don't want to get blood on the carpet of your floor of your car, goodness. So within 30 minutes of all that happening, Bowie County Sheriff W.H. Bill Presley and 3 other officers arrived at the scene of the attack, and they found his pants 100 yards away from where the car had been parked. She was hospitalized overnight for a minor head wound, although she probably should have been in there longer for the psychological wounds that they are all she was had to deal with. Plus, and he was in there for 14 days with multiple skull fractures, and again probably needed psychological treatment as well to deal with all of that. Excuse me. And they gave the problem with the investigation is the fact that they didn't remember it the same way. But I mean, again, eyewitness accounts are always difficult anyway. but they also saw it from different angles. So Hollis said that lights were shining in his eyes. So of course that's going to make it difficult for him to see anyway. But he thought it was a tanned white man that attacked them, and she believed that it was a black man that attacked her. But they couldn't really they couldn't agree on it. So, but they could agree that he was tall, and I believe they both said tall and thin, like over 6 foot. The tall and thin comes back later for one of the suspects. I think, not that I really think that this suspect did it, but it just comes back to like, oh, maybe, but who knows. They both thought he was around 30 years old. But again, he had a hood on, so you're only going to see hands. And if he had a flashlight in his hand, like, who knows either way. And it was dark. There's no lights out, so who knows whether, like, what it could have been and who the attacker really was. But because their account differed so greatly, and they couldn't agree, the investigators believed that they knew their attackers and that they were hiding something, that they weren't being truthful, that they knew more that they were saying. And honestly, I'm surprised they remembered anything after being hit in the head. Like, they were talking to him at the hospital. They probably remembered more as they came on. But again, this is 46, so they didn't really understand. I mean, we're still figuring stuff out about head wounds. So, I mean, they probably should have come back later after therapy, going through it, because that images come back out later. So they might have remembered more later as their healing continued, because they probably didn't really remember that much after all those traumatic events. So yeah, but she did say there was, it was like the white mask with eyes and mouth cut out. But again, they said that they believed that they actually knew them, and they did look into her ex-husband. They looked into people they knew, and like they were able to rule everybody out, but they still didn't believe that they were telling the truth and that they were hiding something, that they knew more about their attacker than they were letting on, which sounds really callous. And the way that they kind of talk about it, I mean, it does sound callous, but I can kind of not completely understand. But this is 1946, and even today, serial killers are hard to find. You have to connect, like, especially if it's a stranger attack. You have no idea how they decided that this person was going to be their victim. So it's really hard finding the connection is going to be a lot harder, and finding evidence is going to be a lot harder than a one-off attack. A one-off attack is going to be a lot, I mean, not that it's easy, but it's going to be a little bit easier to find, because you can look into the person's life and find the enemy or whatever it is. And as we all know from Snapped and all that nonsense, it's always the husband, it's always the wife, it's usually somebody close by. Jumping to a stranger serial attacker is not what they're going to go for originally. So Now, I feel like as soon as they were like adamant that they did not know their attacker and were, eventually they should start believing them and again opening the investigation wider once they have eliminated the people close to them. Yes, they should have gone further out. But again, there's not any evidence at the scene. They'd had fingerprints, but it's not like they had a database to go off of. There wasn't any DNA, and if there was, they didn't have any way to test it. So there really wasn't much that they could do, but they should have started to open the investigation beyond the people around them. But at this time in the 40s, I couldn't imagine this. Nowadays, I feel like if this attack, not that I want this attack to happen again, but I feel like if this attack happened nowadays, they probably would have an easier time finding out who it was, because I'm sure some kind of DNA would have been left at the scene. There is a database. I mean, if he wasn't in the database, that's the one thing, but at least they would have it to put on file, so if it got triggered by anybody, they'd be able to find it. But again, they don't have that back then. So again, it's going to be harder, and they don't want it to be that, because that's going to be harder to solve, of course. And they want it to be somebody that they know it's going to be easier to solve. But it's like eventually you gotta move beyond people that the victims or the survivors knew, and you gotta open it up if they're really adamant that they didn't know who they were. I mean, maybe it was a stalker that they knew but they didn't realize, but there's a lot of what ifs in this case. But they continued to think that they just didn't want to talk about it, and they knew, so they kind of just left it at that, and nothing came of it. And there weren't ever any suspects that were investigated or questioned in that case. So 3 weeks later, the second attack, March 24th, 1946, we have Richard Lanier Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. He was born in August 31st, 1916. He was a 29-year-old Navy veteran. He was discharged from Seabees in November 45, and he was a carpenter, a painter, and handled his own contracting. And Polly Ann Moore was born November 10th, 1928, graduated from high school in 1945 in Atlanta, Texas at the age of 16, and then she worked at the Red River Arsenal, now it's the Red River Army Depot, as a checker since July. It was back and forth. Her family lived further away, but she wanted a job, so she was really smart, really independent, and she had her own job and was like renting from a family member, and she go see her family on the weekends. But she was 16 at that point, and then she was 17 when they started dating. Whichever, all of the podcasts are and the books that I everything was yeah, they had been dating for 6 weeks. He's 29 and she's 17, which I know is a long time. It was 1946. I know she was on her own. She had her own job. She was super independent, but I just find that it's still odd. It's still odd. Why? I know in all of the stuff that I listened to was it was a different time. The age difference wasn't as big a deal, but it just still seems kind of odd. But moving past that, they'd been dating for 6 weeks, and they had just seen a film on their date, a late night film on their date night, and they were headed home, and they stopped by a lover's lane. When they were attacked. Alright. They were found dead in Griffin's 1941 Oldsmobile. on Sunday, March 24th, 1946. But they weren't discovered until between 8:30 and 9:30 in the morning by a passing motorist. So that's kind of, this one I've noticed doesn't get as much attention. There's some like errors that happen with this one as well, so we don't know as much about this one as well. Just doesn't. Ooh, hey, pin. Oh man. Ah, well then. Gotta undo it. Hold on. Well. Let's not burn myself. I already did that. Pardon me. Okay, we're gonna have to let this cool for a second. Well, we can still continue though. Get out of there. Just burning shit. Okay. Alright. So, they were found 8:30 to 9 by a passing motorist. There we go. Slowly but surely. There we go. Take that off. Put another one on. Hold up. There we go. And here. Ow! It's hot. Not that hot though. We're good. I mean, it is hot, but that part wasn't that hot. Stay. Alright. It was on the Lover's Lane name, the road was Rich Road, now South Robinson, near Railroad Spur, 100 yards south of US Highway 67 West. So if you know where that is. And it's near, the reason that's important is because it's near a nightclub called Club Dallas. So they're able to, they take in some witnesses or people from the club to see if they saw anything that night. But they didn't, of course. Oh my god. I really, is it hot? How is that hot already? There. Trying to be safe, but you know what? Sometimes it just doesn't want to cooperate. There we go. Okay. All right. Let that heat back up. This one is also probably, I don't want to say the term cleanest, but it doesn't get noticed till the next day. Everything is like really neat and tidy for an attack. You know, I'm not saying that he did a good job. I'm just saying, as far as like getting away with it and covering it up, this is the neatest of the crimes. So, and not in a good way. Not neat in a good way. It just meant when reading about it and when they talk about it, it's not glossed over, but there isn't as much to talk about as far as like finding information out about it. And it just kind of like, it's the first attack, and then the next attack is where things start to ramp up. And again, I think it's because they still aren't connecting the dots. And they don't want to, of course. It's really difficult to want it to be a serial killer. Not that they want it to be a serial killer, but that jumping to that point, that's a big jump, and that's going to be a lot of investigation, and that's going to be out of the wheelhouse for many departments during that time. It's still a new thing. So he was Griffin was found in the front seat with his knees with his hand resting, knees up, and his head resting on his crossed hands and his pockets inside out, kind of setting the scene that he had been they had been robbed. And then Moore was sprawled face down in the back seat, and there was evidence, however, that she was killed on a blanket outside, and then he moved her back in. He was shot twice while in the car, and had been shot. He had been shot in the back of the head. Both had been shot in the back of the head, and they were fully clothed. Blood-soaked patch of earth near the car suggested, again, that they had one or two had been killed outside of the car and then placed back in. And a .32 caliber cartridge shell also found, possibly. They were wrapped in the blanket, and there was like the blood was dripping out of the car. So there was thought that they were on the blanket and shot, and then he wrapped him back up and put them back in the car, or at least her. And neither of them had any kind of extensive examination or like detailed autopsy, although they did remove the bullets from Griffin. But there was a mistake that happened with Polly Ann, and they didn't remove the bullets, and they didn't really do a comprehensive exam on her either, to see if there had been a sexual assault. There were rumors that she had been sexually assaulted, but there really wasn't any. They say modern reports refute it, but there wasn't there really wasn't a kit done or any kind of like comprehensive exam done on her before they accidentally released her to the funeral home, and they buried her before they could really do that investigation. So they didn't really have a good enough examination on her to get very much evidence off of her. They did get the bullets out of Griffin though, so they did have his, although there still really wasn't a thorough examination on him as well. But thorough then and thorough now, even thorough back then, isn't really going to live up to what we have today. So I don't know if they really would have gotten that much out of it anyway. This is when, so they still kind of think that it's a one-off. They talk to witnesses at the club. Nobody knows. They March 30th, they have a $500 reward in effort to get any information. How nothing comes of it though. But Mary Jean Larry, she goes to the police and say, hey, I think there's a connection. You should be looking into like some kind of serial attacker. Listen to this woman. But they're like, no, you're not saying who your attacker is, so go away. They don't want to listen to it. I'm sure they didn't say it in those words though. But somehow, they don't believe her, and they just tell her to go on her way. But maybe they should have. Although even if they did believe her, I don't know if that really would have stopped this next attack, because they didn't really have not like they have anything to go off of. So we have the third attack, the second double murder. And this is where things really start to change in the investigation and with the reaction in the town. Alright, so just take a second, show this off a little bit. So we've got our first one down. We got a little old jar of salt and a little scooper with some salt here. Now we go on to our rosemary by the garden gate. So April 13th, again, about 3 weeks later, we have another attack. Paul James Martin and Betty Jo Booker. And I guess she's the youngest. They're the youngest victims, so I think that's why also they make more of a splash as far as like trying to investigate and finding it. They're younger. This is the third one. It's a lot. This one's a lot more gruesome. There's a lot more going on with this one, so it holds a little bit more there's a little bit more evidence to go off of. Not that it really helps the not much to help really catch anybody, but there's a lot more happening at this attack than at the second attack. Okay. So he was born in Smackover, Arkansas, May 8th, 1929. And he was 16-year-old junior in high school at the time of his death, and he had worked at his family's ice plant in Kilgore when he was young. His brother was R.S. Martin Jr. And he was described as a quiet kid. He was a member of the Beach Street Baptist Church, the same church as Betty Jo, so they're friends. He completed 9th grade at Arkansas Junior High and then attended the Gulf Coast Military Academy in Gulfport, Mississippi in 1945. Before going to school in Kilgore, he and Booker had been friends since their time attending kindergarten together until she moved to the Texas side in 1944. Betty Jo Booker, there is so much on her. She seems like she was a cool kid. Not that none of the other ones are. It's just I think because of the stuff that happened in the investigation and stuff that happened with her saxophone and going back and forth and the search for her, there's just a lot. They talk about her a lot more than the other ones. What? I see. Did you get other things too?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Love you.
I love you too.
Ah, fuck, I can't see shit.
Yeah.
Wall, door, there it is.
Alright. Alright. Okay. So, like I said, there just seems to be more known about her, or at least they talk about her more. And I think that's because this is when they start to really understand that they have an issue that they really need to deal with. So so she was born June 5th, 1930. She was 15-year-old junior at Texas High School at the time of her death, and she was raised in the church, and her friend again was Paul, and they were again members at the Beach Street Baptist Church. And she played she was a saxophone player, E flat alto saxophone, in the second chair in the Jerry Atkins Orchestra and her high school band. And then she also played in a big band music, one second. There we go. Called the Rhythmaires, big band era. And then the reason why she played in that, there was also a lot of teenagers who played in this band, even though they would play late on the weekends at different concerts, was that it was also during the war, so they didn't have as many people to play. And then even when they came back, the guys were getting jobs and other things, so they needed more people to play. But the fact that she played with them, that, I mean, she's a good saxophone player. It's pretty cool. Even though there were some older musicians in there too, but there were still teenagers that played with them. Lost my place. Whew. I'm still recovering from this week's work. Some weeks I can not sleep. Some weeks I sleep all the sleeps. Ugh. Saturdays at work are always so difficult. And it just so happens to be my Friday, so I feel like Sundays I'm always in recovery. Today is Monday. Not that you have to be watching it on Monday, but I meant to film yesterday, but my body said no. We're gonna sleep. Ugh. Alright. And so, several years after the death of her father, her mother Bessie remarried her stepfather, Carl Brown, an employee of the Guilford Company. This is just I just like having some information about them and knowing a little bit about their lives, not just their death. They were friends until kindergarten, until she moved to the Texas. They were on the Arkansas side, and then she moved to the Texas side. She actually had a date that night with her, I don't know if they were boyfriend or if they were just dating, with a guy named Jimmy Mars. But Paul Martin was in town, and so he wanted to take her home that night and hang out with Betty, whether or not it was like some kind of weird friend zone thing, but he wanted to hang out with her. She said cool. So she had actually called Jimmy that night and asked if it was okay if he picked her up instead, and he said yeah. And the thing with Betty was that her saxophone was really important to her. Everybody would always go out after the concerts, even though it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And anybody who's ever done theater knows it's Denny's time after you get out, after it lets out, going out for drinks, or if you're in high school, you can go out to Denny's and have pancakes late at night. So it's like 1 in the morning, but even if she would go out, she always went home first to put away her saxophone because it was really important to her. So that night, he picks her up, and they're on their way home. For her to put her saxophone away, and they stop by the Lover's Lane, which her friends are all. They don't really like to talk about it, but they're kind of confused by it as well because they were just friends. Everybody knew they were just friends, so why they stopped by that was kind of confusing to them. But they stop by this Lover's Lane. Before going on to return her saxophone. Just a little bit more about her. She was really popular and she had a lot of friends. She was really well liked in high school, and she was Little Miss Texarkana in 1934, representing the Presbyterian bookstore. And after, she was a straight A student, and she was planning on becoming a medical technician, and after her death, the Rhythmaires never played again, and the night in question, they were playing a gig at the VFW on West 4th and Oak Street. There we go. Okay. So that night, like I said, she was supposed to go home first before she went out with everybody. And her mom realized that she hadn't come home yet to put away her saxophone, and her mom got worried, like, hey, where's Betty? Like, she's not home. And her stepfather, who basically raised her, I'm pretty sure from what I've read before, is that she was younger when her father died, that was her like main family. Stepfather was like, it's okay, you don't have to worry about it. But the mom was like, no, we do need to worry about it. That's not like her to not come home and put away her saxophone. It's okay, we'll just wait a little bit longer. It's okay. But she wouldn't let it rest. And then I like jumped through all of my notes. Many of the classmates didn't really like to talk about it. It was really tragic, and it was still in there. And the funeral was the day off from school, and everybody went. And Mrs. Booker said, I trust the men who are handling the investigation into my daughter's death. I'm sure they'll find whoever did it if he is caught, and I would like to kill him. If they would let me, I would kill him myself. Good mama. Not that you should, but she's stick up for her baby. Okay. I jumped through all of my notes. Let me get down, catch up with myself. Ow. Ooh. I need to get a better cushion for my chair. All right. So 1:30 Sunday morning, April 14th, both of them, he had picked her up from the performance, and then that was the last time either of them were seen again. So Martin's body was found at 6:30 in the morning by Mr. and Mrs. G.H. Weaver and their son, lying on his side by the northern edge of North Park Road. And he was found a mile and a half from his car, which they found him first. They were searching for Betty because her mom was like, I know there's something wrong. She should be home by now. And they found him first. And they found him at 6:30 in the morning. And from what I remember, from what I read, they found him first, and they didn't really connect it to her yet until they realized that he was the one that was supposed to be picking her up that night. So then they amped up the search for her, and they were looking for her. And then she was found at about 11:30 in the morning, about 2 miles away from Martin's body, behind a tree. And she was found by members of the Boyd family, who had joined the search party. And her body was found they were both found fully clothed. And her right hand was in her pocket, buttoned overcoat, of her buttoned overcoat. Booker had been shot twice. Forrest, thank you for your input. Once through the chest and once through the face, and the weapon used was the same from the first double murder, the 32 caliber Colt pistol. Martin's 1946 Ford Club Coupe was found 3 miles from Booker's body and about 1.5 miles from his body, and was parked outside Spring Lake Park with the keys still in it. The authorities weren't sure who was shot first. Sheriff Presley and Texas Ranger Captain Manuel Gonzalez said of the examination of the body indicated they both put up a hell of a fight. He was shot like in the face and in the hand multiple times. So they found that they fought like hell for their lives. They really put up a struggle. And I believe when examining her, they think that she may have been attacked and then redressed, because there were like leaves inside the coat. Like that, like maybe who had gotten in it when they were off of her, and then they got in as the attacker had redressed her, but they weren't for sure. I believe it was I don't know what these are on my notes, but she was sexually assaulted. But again, like it's not like they have DNA to hold on it, so they don't really for them to examine it to anybody else. And that's also why they think that she had been redressed after death because of that as well. They didn't find her saxophone until about 6 months later. It was in the underbrush near where the body was found. A reward now had climbed to $1,700, leading to any kind of information that led to the arrest of the person responsible for the attacks. Then that I'll get to in just a second. There's some rumors are starting to this is when things are starting to get connected. Rumors are starting to appear. The investigations are starting to get connected and ramped up, and hysteria is starting. This is also when the Rangers come into town to start trying to help investigate, keep people safe. As well as this is when the term is coined by the newspapers, the Phantom Slayer or the Phantom Killer. So this is when they're like, oh, we fucked up. Now we really got to find out who this person is. So like, yeah, the Rangers are coming. There's starting to have some curfews. There's more curfews later, but like there's like things are starting to feel really feel unsafe. Not just like the normal crime that's going on in the town. There's something more sinister happening, and people need to be on their toes. Our last attack, and this is there's questions of whether this one is part of the Phantom Killers. I think it probably is, considering like that nothing really happened afterward. It could have knowing what we know about serial killers and how they can change their MO and how things do change sometimes when they don't want to get caught. I think that it's probably part of it. But I'm not a professional. I just like to learn about it, but I'm not, can take my opinion with a grain of salt, for sure. But this is the last attack officially linked with the Phantom Killers. The Phantom Killer, the Moonlight Murders. So, we have Walter Virgil Starks, was born April 3rd, 1909. He was 37-year-old farmer, modest ranch-style home on a 500-acre farm located about 10 miles northeast of Texarkana on Highway 67 East. He lived not far from his brother, Charlie, who died in 1960. Only 2 miles away from his father. So it's just like this is a farming community, just like lots of property, but it was still of a family area. People were close. So this is more of the area that's still it's still quieter. It's not as much crime, not as populated. So I can see why some people think it's not connected because the MO is changing, but that makes me also think that it might be connected. It's just that because he doesn't want to get caught, I need to change up my MO. It's still a couple. They're a little bit older, and it's a little further away from the lovers' lanes, but it's still in the dark, and it's still in the quiet area, and it's still 3 weeks from the last attack. So I think there's still enough to link it. I just think that he may have changed up his tactics because he didn't want to get caught. Not that he had left anything at the scene to get caught anyway, but he just, for some, attackers don't want to get caught. Even if they want to tell their story, they still don't want to get caught. Even if they want recognition, they still don't want to get caught. So he lives in this, and he also was a welder. He did welding as well, and that comes into play later with some of the suspects. So he has like this, it's called slag, just to keep that in mind. It's like scrap metal, and it's around in his area, so we just have to remember that as well. And then his wife, who's badass, Catherine Katie Starks, was born September 25th, 1909 in Redwater, Texas. She was 36 at the time of her attack and was married and lived at the farmhouse for 5 years with Virgil. I mean, I would assume so that they would live together. They were married. I don't know why. I know that they're only 36, 37, so they're not that much older than I am. But for some reason, when, I guess just because this whole thing is an older case, they just seemed older when they talk about them. But I guess because they are older than the other victims, but it almost it makes them seem ancient. But I know that they're not. They're still young. And when we talk about the film, it was like, oh yeah, they really aren't that old, even though they're older than the other victims. They really aren't. It's not like they're like an old decrepit couple. They're just older than the other victims. Whew. And she does survive. This woman's tenacity and will to live, shit, it's crazy. It is a scene out of a murder film, out of a slasher. And the film, it's the film in 1976. If they did the film today, it would definitely make it of course it's probably NC-17, like the original Saw are, if they really did it true to what she went through. Oh, I couldn't imagine actually seeing it on film, she's not alive today, but reliving that. Oh my god. So let's get into it. There's a warning for it, but so on Friday, May 3rd, right around 9 o'clock, he was age 37. Virgil was in his home listening to the radio and was sitting in his chair, and she had given him a heating pad for his sore back. and was sitting in his armchair listening and relaxing when he gets shot with, and this is the other thing that makes them think it's maybe not related, but again, it could be just preservation to not get caught, is they shot with a 22 caliber gun instead of a 32 caliber. She thought it was glass, it was just sounded like glass breaking, which I think the gunshot coming through the glass, but she didn't hear the gunshot, she just heard the glass breaking. And he was shot and he slumps over in his chair. They were fired in the back of his head through closed double window 3 feet away. She did not hear the gunshots again, like I said, she just heard the glass breaking. She thought Virgil had dropped something because he was slumped over in his chair, and then she saw the blood running off of him, and when she lifted up his head, and she realized she was dead, and she ran to the phone to call police. And then as she's on, it's a wall phone, it's not, it was a phone on the wall, so she's calling, and before she can finish calling, she gets shot twice in the face, from the same window. One bullet enters her right cheek and exits past her left ear, and the other one goes through the bottom of her mouth, breaks her jaw, and then the bullet is lodged under her tongue. And she runs, then she drops to her knees, she manages to get back up, there's blood running from her face, she's blinded by it, she's still trying to get through her house, she's trying to find her gun, then she tries to go to the living room to write a note, whether or not maybe, I don't know, who did it, or she's trying to write a goodbye note, I don't know. She's not really sure why she's trying to write a note, because she couldn't get to her gun. So then then he's coming into the house. So she exits the house and stumbles toward her outside. So she's trying to get out. As he's trying to get in, she's trying to get out, get to the gun, wherever, just trying to survive. And as she's running, there's just a river of blood and teeth following her as she gets out. Then she goes barefoot, blinded by blood in her face, can't really speak or anything, goes to her brother-in-law's house, knocks on the door. They're not home, of course. So she has to run another 50 yards to the neighbor, A.B. Pratter's house. And she gets out, Virgil's dead and collapses on the front lawn. And he shoots his gun in the air to alert authorities. They call and come to the scene. He's trying to alert the neighbors. When we get to the hysteria, it's probably something that they had with all their neighbors. Because people were getting so, they had booby traps and everything. We'll get into some of the stuff that they had, but people probably had if I shoot in the air, that's signaling that there was an attack, let's go. People were on high alert during this time. And so they might, it gets even worse afterwards. So maybe, that was just something that they had in that area. So just to let them know if something went wrong or if they needed help. Mrs. Starks gave Pratter shot the rifle near, summoned the neighbor Elmer Taylor, who Pratter sent to collect his car, and then Taylor compiled and along with the Pratter friend took Katie to the hospital. And then she tried to give one of her gold-filling teeth that had fallen out to him as thank you in a semi-conscious state, and before slumping forward in the front seat. She lost a lot of blood, and she showed no signs of going into shock, and her heart rate remained normal. God. she was questioned in the operating room by Sheriff W.E. Davis, who became head of the investigation. And that's another thing, is that, I mean, I know that they had like heads of each investigation. There should have been a task force for the entirety. There shouldn't have been like all these separate investigations. So again, there's not going to be as much crossover, even though it was in the same area. It's like if these are related, then they need to be connected. So then they get, so when they come to the crime scene, the cops said that they were able to follow. It was really hard to get in a lot of information or evidence because it was such a mess inside, and they just followed. They could kind of track what happened as far as like the timeline of the attack, because it was just like a river of blood and teeth, so they could track her footsteps because she was losing blood and teeth all throughout wherever she was going in the house and then over to the neighbors. But because she was tracking blood everywhere, and then they came in and tracked evidence everywhere, there really wasn't a lot for them to collect as far as evidence. Not that they could have done anything with that evidence very much anyway. There's no testing or anything. And then the Sunday morning paper reads, "Murder rocks city again, farmer slain, wife wounded." And she, so she did survive. She did survive. It's insane that she was able to survive that attack. Ooh, I'm hungry. Ugh. I can't. It's like a miracle. It's insane that she was able to survive and went through all of that and not go into shock. That is just crazy. Okay, so now those are the attacks. There aren't any other. There is a kidnapping that people think might have gone, that might have been connected, but they don't think so. And I don't think he wasn't somebody who was taking victims. He was killing them on the scene. So I don't think that was a tech. And there's also somebody who's found on the train tracks. But they don't think, again, they don't think he was connected as well. I will get to that one too, because there's a connection in the film. But again, these are the crimes that are consistent or linked to the Phantom. But the hysteria and just what the town goes through during this time is very. It kind of reminds me, the way they talk about it kind of reminds me of the Golden State Killer, when people are like booby trapping their houses and not really sure how to protect themselves from this. That's what it just gets really crazy. So again, the city was used to crime, but this was different. These are one-off crimes. Like they're used to one-off crimes where like the victim's connected, they know their attacker. This is something different. This is a stranger. This is like they're telling people, okay, so there's a curfew in the town, stay off the lovers' lanes. That's something that they could do, but now they're getting attacked in their homes. So they're selling out of shutters. People are boarding up their windows. They're running out of guns in Texas. They are arming themselves. They are putting up booby traps in their houses. They are just, they are going for it. A lot of people are either leaving to stay with family, or they moved into the Grimm Hotel, which it was named after the person, his last name was Grimm. So it's just kind of an ironic twist of the name. But people were moving into the hotels. They were just like trying to stay, and it was high alert all the time. Texarkana residents kept the police busy and then again, so Now, after these attacks and everything is connected, that's when the residents really start to get paranoid, which I find interesting is that they weren't as paranoid before, and then after this last attack, that's when they get really paranoid, and then there are no more attacks, which I think is kind of odd. I wonder, I mean, there's theories. It's probably the main suspect that they have, but maybe he just left. Maybe he went on to another town and attacked other people in a similar fashion. But I don't know. But yeah, so they were getting phone calls left and right from scared people that thought that they were, going to be the next attack. They were getting calls left and right from hysteria. People were, I went through the guns. I'm looking for the example. Hold on. Oh, I'm going to get to it right now. Okay. But, they had a curfew, and then they also closed the liquor stores at 9:30. And there was a note on some of them that say, "We fully understand the state of mind in which Texarkana is now gripped, and we are selling no liquor to persons who already have been drinking. We do not wish to add further troubles to the police. Any persons who drinks whiskey at this time to get drunk and wander around the streets of Texarkana is further complicating the works of the police and is placing himself in grave danger of being shot by people whose nerves are on edge from the recent murders." So they're not selling alcohol. It's people who are already drunk. They're closing at 9:30. There's a curfew. People who, you stay indoors at night. You board up your windows. You booby trap your house. I heard one where her husband worked at night, so she tied like a contraption, like a rope, and had a contraption from her bedpost to the front door. So if anybody tried to open the front door, it would pull on her bedpost. Yeah, so there was just they were on high alert. Then there were people who called, let's see, there was an incident where a tavern owner shot a proprietor in the foot because he was, I don't know exactly, they don't have the exact details about it, but he must have been doing something to make him nervous. Maybe he was saying weird stuff, but he got shot in the foot because of it. There was also a call to the department and said that they heard some rustling outside. They found out that they came by and it was just like a cat in a trash can. Let's see. They're trying to keep people from being like too hysterical, but so I'm trying to let me get to my quote here. So on Monday, May 6th, a headline stated the area was living in fear and Captain Gonzalez helped fuel this hysteria. So we're trying to calm people down, but we're also going to put them on edge as well. He says, citizens should oil up their guns and see if they are loaded. Put them out of reach of children. Do not use unless it is necessary, but if you believe it is, do not hesitate. And he responded as well as like the town's fears. So I tell them to check the locks and bolts on their doors and get a double barrel shotgun to take care of any intruder who tried to get in. And so it's like, I don't know if these days they would call for that, or I mean, because hysteria fuels accidents as well. So we want to be proactive in keeping ourselves safe, but we also don't want to cause any accidents as well. You had to call ahead if you were coming to see anybody, if you're visiting anybody, because if you didn't call ahead and they weren't prepared for you, you could get shot if you were coming up to visit somebody, which I'm not saying shoot people to come visit you, but I definitely don't like to answer my door. Like, people don't pop by anymore, and I wonder if it's kind of from this case. Like, you don't pop by. Yeah, I don't pop by because you could be an intruder. No, I don't really know if that's related at all, but I do know that I remember when I was younger, my grandma lived with us, like my older cousins and her sister and stuff. They would pop by and just visit from time to time, but I know I don't have none of my family age friends now or anything would just like, oh, I'm just gonna come pop by and see you. No, we don't do that. We don't answer the door. We duck. I remember when anybody would come by to sell anything, like knock on the door, like, turn on the TV, shh, turn off the lights, we don't want to talk to anybody. We don't buy anything. Nobody goes door to door anymore. Kidding me? I'm not home. I'm home all the time, but I'm not home. Don't come by. Don't do that. So yeah, you would have to call ahead of time to tell people you were coming by, which is just, courteous anyway. What if I was leaving? And I guess you wouldn't go. You wouldn't come over. There was the cat in the trash can incident. They pulled over, let's see, strange man with there was a call from the Olive Street officers investigated a strange man on someone's porch, but it turned out that he had stepped out of the rain to wait for a bus. So again, but I mean, let's see, reports of a prowler bumping against houses turned out to be a hedge just blowing in the wind. There was a call about a family hearing tapping at the door, which was just a messenger delivering a package. There was a call of, at one point, when white-faced calves broke loose around the county and were on lawn speed, there were calls about frightened residents called to report white-faced things in the dark. Like, well, if there's like a herd of phantoms, I mean, you need to get the cows back home, but that just makes me laugh that they were like worried that they've like multiplied. As news announcements spread, suspects were searched for. Let's see. Yeah, again, they were stocking up on guns and axes and everything, any kind of booby trap to protect themselves. And then 3 weeks comes and goes and there's no attack. But again, they're still on edge. It's pretty crazy. So, rumors and investigations. So there's a rumor that there was a pastor who had turned in his son for being the phantom, but that didn't turn out to be true. There was rumors on the 19th that there was somebody had been caught for it and that they were holding him at the Texas jail, and there were rangers with submachine guns like keeping an eye on him, but that didn't turn out to be true either. Pull this back out. Sorry, guys. Notes got all messed up. It reminds me, not only does it remind me of the hysteria during the Golden State Killer area when they were dealing with that rapist and the Visalia ransacker and all that, but it also reminds me of the hysteria that they were feeling in the Jaws case. Not that that's real either, but it's just if you go into the water and then yell shark and you've got all these people on the 4th of July trying to run out, that it reminds me of that image of all of this hysteria causing more issues. Oh, here we go. shoot, my goodness, let me pull this out. I'm trying to read my quote, but my notes got all messed up. 1 second. But yeah, it just seems like, although I don't think anybody got, I mean, some people got injured and there were a lot of calls, but I don't think anybody got killed from the hysteria, which is lucky. Alright, but the investigators say, like if he is caught, that they will tell the newspapers, you know, they will be the one first to say if they caught him or not. So it wasn't him in the out of town jail. And then Presley, one of the investigators, states in the paper, these rumors are positively not true. We can understand why the people believe them. All of us are tense and are hopeful that at any hour officers will announce that they have the killer in custody. The people must not become so anxious to rid themselves of the killer, however, that they brand innocent persons as the murderer and believe unfounded stories. The investigating officers have announced that when and if the killer is apprehended or killed, the public will be given the full story through the newspapers. We affirm this statement. The newspapers are kept posted on developments in the investigation, and they will announce all news immediately. We believe that people have the right to know if the killer is caught or killed, and we pledge ourselves to let the public have this information. But I mean, people were probably not wanting to believe that they would want to keep it under wraps. Although I don't know why they would, since this is such a big case, getting that type of caller would that'd be like a career making arrest. So I don't know why they would want to hide it unless it was somebody prominent. Not that there is. None of the suspects are like famous or anybody, so unless the real murderer was famous and they did keep it in wraps, and then they just, I don't know, I'm in conspiracy land now and there's none of that. I'm just pulling shit out of my ass. But okay, and then we have so he again came out. Sheriff Bill Presley then also came out to tell people, because he had the difficult sheriff and his deputy Bill Presley and deputies have a difficult task ahead of them as they attempt to solve the shocking double murder discovered Saturday. So this is from one of the newspapers from earlier. Texarkana residents can help investigation, and at the same time, if they are not careful, they can hinder the investigation and cause officers to spend many hours following blind trails. Persons who have information and might furnish a clue to identify of the slayer or slayers, or which might indicate a motive for the crime, should not divulge such information on the street corners or at cold drink stands, but should immediately make it available to officers. Do not spread rumors regardless of how many bases for the fact that there is in them. Do not say I heard or they say, because the chances are that the person listening will repeat the information and enlarge upon it. Before long, the story grows to such proportions as to necessitate a detailed investigation by the officers, thereby perhaps pulling them off the true trail and sending them up a blind alley. Stick to facts that you know of your own personal knowledge and relay those facts as quickly as possible to the officers. And that was March 27, 1946. That was even before this is Texarkana Gazette suggesting readers how they can help, and that was before, that was only into the second attack, but still, and I feel like those words are pretty true today, that we shouldn't be playing telephone with information. I think we definitely, it gets pretty crazy out there. Oh, they say this, they say that, I read this, blah blah blah. But still, yeah, I can only imagine. 1946. I mean, it's not like there's not a lot to do back then anyway besides go to the movies, but yeah, oh my gosh. Them trying to figure out who it is. Whew. Alright. We're almost to the film part. We're on our last bit, so we've got our lavender patch, we got rosemary by a gate, and we've got salt. But even with those warnings and information from the sheriff and the investigators, that is not going to stop the residents of Texarkana of trying to take it into their own hands and trying to catch him and sleuth. They're going to do it. They're going to do it anyway. So let's hear about some of that fun stuff. Honestly, these could have ended a lot worse. Alright, so they were, although everybody was in fear, they're not taking this lying down, so they're not going down without a fight. So some kids continued to park on desert roads. Of course, Chief Deputy Tillman Johnson was patrolling a vacant road with Arkansas State Trooper Charlie Boyd when they came up upon a parked car. When Johnson approached the car, noticed the couple, he introduced himself and said, "Aren't you scared to be parked out here at night?" And the girl replied, "You're the one that ought to be scared, mister. It's a good thing you told me who you were." And she revealed she was pointing a .25 caliber pistol at him the whole time. So they were not afraid. So either they were just armed and out there having a good time, or they were trying to bait him out. And that was, what date? I don't know if they have the date of that. I was thinking that was earlier, but I'm pretty sure it was after the Stark attack. Like either they were trying to coax him out or they were just being prepared. And then on May 10th, the Texarkana police officers chased a car that had been following a bus for 3 miles before shooting out the tires and arresting C.J. Lauderdale Jr., a high school athlete. When questioned at the station, he explained that he was unaware that they were policemen because they were driving an unmarked car, and he was following the bus because he saw a suspicious passenger had entered. Was following the bus because he was suspicious of a passenger that had entered from a private car. So like he got out of a car and got onto the bus. So he was following a suspect of himself. So they're really trying to figure out who this person was. Whether or not they got help from the sheriff's department at all. They were just like, we're taking this into our own hands. Not that I don't understand that. Like, I understand having that feeling too, but it's a way to get somebody hurt or killed that doesn't need to be. Oh my God. I mean, it's luckily that somebody didn't. May 12th, Captain Gonzalez gives warning to teenage sleuths in the Gazette, saying it's a good way to get killed. Although, even though they said that, they did have rangers. There were police officers that sheriffs and police officers would dress and decoy themselves as lovers on lovers' lanes. Whether or not, I don't know if they actually wore wigs or not. That image is interesting, but like they would go off. They put a wig on or whatever and go off and try and bait them. But they also he says these teenage sleuths are going to get themselves killed, but then they had rangers, children of the Texas Rangers, they got them to be baits too. So it's okay for them, but as long as, it's only okay if it's the Rangers kids, because apparently they have better training, so they're okay with it. But I guess because they had like the cops watching them, so it would be a little bit better. But that's still really, really risky. Woo. Like that's super risky. But despite all of that, they didn't they never took the bait. And there weren't any other attacks in this area linked to the Phantom. Alright, so now let's get into who's investigating these crimes. I dropped a few names, but let's talk about who the people were. So we have Miller County Sheriff's Deputy Tillman Brian Johnson. He was born in 1911, moved to Texarkana in 1930s, started working for the Miller County Sheriff's Department in 1938. He served in the military for 2 years before returning home and working on the Virgil Starks case. He soon became one of the lead investigators in that case, and Johnson did not believe that the Phantom committed the Starks murder, which I can understand, but I think that he was just changing his MO. Like sometimes they go, like in a strangling case, they go from hands to using like an apparatus because it is hard to strangle somebody with your bare hands. It takes longer and it takes a lot more force, so they might change it up, or they don't want to get caught, so they change that. So I feel like it still could have been connected. And then he was the last surviving lawman of the Phantom slayings and was the go-to man for the case. He had been contacted many times by individuals and television crews, so he did a lot of interviews about the case. He kept many personal files of the case, most of which became the only case files, photographs, eventually, because many of the original files and photographs of the police notes eventually went missing from both police departments. Ooh. I feel like there's probably some Reddit conspiracy on that. Johnson firmly believed the identity of the Phantom was Yul Sweeney, which we will get to as far as he is the main suspect and pretty much thought to have been the actual Phantom, but there isn't a lot of hard evidence to get a conviction, so it's still circumstantial. Alrighty. Hey, wait, hold on. Why is it? Did I mess up some of my notes again? Goodness. Oh, here we go. Okay. Now we have the Arkansas State Police Detective Max Andrew Tackett, and he is influential in this case, and he's one of the reasons why we have Yul Sweeney as a suspect. He was born in 1912 in Arkansas and then moved to Texarkana in 1941. He was the member of the Arkansas State Police from 41 to 48. He's having served as a trooper and then a special investigator during that period. And Tackett was the Texarkana, Arkansas police chief from 1948 to 1968. He was a World War II combat veteran and had served in Belgium, France, and Netherlands, and Germany. He was also a member of the Beach Street Baptist Church and the Optimist Club. He was said to be colorful and outspoken and controversial figure of the police department, and he became the arresting officer and the lead suspect, Yul Sweeney. I don't want to get into too much of the details, but he's the one. He figures out about some stolen cars, and then he finds Yul Sweeney, and so he's able to connect it with the stolen cars. But we'll get that into the investigation and into the suspects in a second. I just want to introduce all of the investigators. There's just so much about this case. It's really interesting. There's just a lot of information to unfold and try to examine. And I think that's because there's so many investigators, there's so many cooks in this kitchen, that I think that's probably part of besides not being really able to investigate like they would today and really get evidence that would be helpful in a court of law. Yeah, I can only imagine. I would hope that this case would be solved today if it happened today. But you never know. It's a tough case. When there's not any actual DNA and evidence and fingerprints, they could run through a database. Goodness. Okay, so we have Bowie County Sheriff William Hardy, or Bill Presley, was born in 1895, Red Springs community, in the Red Springs community of Bowie County. He was a veteran of World War I and served overseas in France and overseas with France. He was a member of the Chapelwood Methodist Church and American Legion Veterans of Foreign Wars, and 32nd to 2nd degree Mason and Shriner. Oh, there you go. There's your conspiracy right there. Oh, God. He was a longtime friend of Texas City Chief of Police Jack and Reynolds, and he knew the Starks family as well. He was the first lawman on the scene at the Mary Jean Larry attack, and the first at this attack, and the first and second double murders. So he was in the shit for this investigation. Alright. If you hear anything right now, I don't know if you can actually hear it. If I can hear it, you can probably hear it. My husband's working on some kind of project in the other room, so I don't know, he's building something. So apologies if you hear the grinder. He died in 1972. All right, now we have Texas Chief of Police Jackson Neely Jack Reynolds. He was born in 1987, longtime friend of Sheriff Presley, and was one of the first officers called to both of the scenes of the double murders, and was also the lead investigator in the Booker's, also leading investigator of Booker's saxophone, Booker's case, and looking for why can't I say words? Looking for her saxophone after the fact. He died in 1966. And then we have the Texas Ranger Captain Manuel Tarzas Lone Wolf Gonzalez. He was born in 1891 in Spain. Stop scrolling. Spain, to parents who were naturalized American citizens. He married in 1920 and enlisted in the Texas Rangers at the same year. He was in charge of controlling gambling, bank robbing, bootlegging, narcotic trafficking, prostitution, sex work, riots, general lawlessness, and the Red River, from the Red River to the Rio Grande, and from El Paso, Texas to the Sabine during the 20s and the 30s. He made captain of the Texas Rangers in 1940, and then in 1946, while hunting the Phantom, he swore to stay in Texarkana until the killer was apprehended, but he left 3 months after the last murder. They kind of dipped out quietly. They didn't make an announcement of it because there hadn't been any other attacks and there wasn't any more information. There really wasn't anything. I mean, of course, I'm sure it haunted him till the day he died. One of those, like, this is my last case kind of thing. Like, if they ever made a movie about him, like coming back, and he probably had a room with all of it on his walls, and he could never let it go for the rest of his life. But they had to. I mean, eventually, people aren't going to stop getting murders. They have to. Not that they wanted to stop investigating, but there's other things that they have to investigate as well. They have to try and solve other crimes. So they kind of left quietly 3 months after the last attack, as things were starting to go back to normal. But they didn't want to make a big announcement because they felt if they did, it might make the Phantom think he was safe to attack again. Although they could have used it as bait, maybe make an announcement and then waited, made this huge fanfare of them leaving, and then see if he came out of the woodwork again. But who knows? I think they also, because of the Yule Sweeney arrest, then they felt that they pretty much had their man, even though they weren't able to actually convict him on that. They felt they could probably leave. But that would have been a way for them to see if it was actually him or not. Was to make an announcement. I can see why they did it both ways, though. I was just thinking about that. That could have been a way for them to lure him out. Gonzalez believed the attack on Hollis and Larry was not committed by the Phantom, and he also believed that somebody else killed Virgil Stark. So I think that, so now you have 2 attackers, or you have 3 attackers. You have somebody that did the double murder, and you have somebody who attacked Hollis and Larry, and then you have somebody who attacked Starks. So you have 3 stranger attacks within a 4-month period of time. Not that can't happen. I mean, they think that there's more than one Boston Strangler, and there's probably more than one Atlanta child killer. So I mean, there's not that there couldn't have been more than one Phantom. There's just a lot of questions whether or not it was or not. But I think the MO was similar. I don't know. There's a lot of back and forth, I guess, and even in my mind. I think they're probably connected, but you never know. So Gonzalez, a quote from him. Oh no, that's not a quote from him, sorry. I thought it was his quote, but it's not his quote. It was a quote about him. It said, "He was one of the best looking men I have ever seen and wore a spotless khaki suit and a white 10-gallon hat. He packed 2 ivory-handled revolvers on his hips and did not deny that he was the ranger who sat in the cashier's office at the Crazy Water Hotel in Mineral Wells and gunned down 2 ex-convicts who sought to rob the place. He was so good-looking that my girl reporters would not leave him alone. He really didn't have the time. He really didn't have the time to hunt down the Phantom. He was too busy giving out interviews." Ooh. And trying to run the Gazette. All the other officers were working on the case, insanely jealous of Lone Wolf, and complained bitterly every time his picture appeared in the paper. I feel like that. So it's like almost like a celebrity investigator. When the FBI comes in Criminal Minds, and they all want to talk to them. Did I miss something? Hold on. Yeah, we're still on this one. I feel like sometimes I've thought I jumped to the next person, but I didn't. Okay. Who is this? I apologize. Stuff got mixed up. JQ, Mephi, Dexter, Alexander, Spree. Describe Gonzalez. Yeah, okay. I don't know why. Doug is always my go-to hum when I'm thinking. Okay. Such higgledy-piggledy nonsense. Okay. Another reporter. Tillman Johnson said whenever he came down the stairs from the hotel room, he called for the press. He was a showman. He was a handsome man, I'd say, and he had a good appearance. And of course, he had a reputation of being a killer. So the press all followed Gonzalez. He also said no, he didn't do any real police work himself. He'd get in the car and ride around, ask a lot of questions about what the other officers had found, and then he released it to the press like it was his information. It got to where after a while some of the officers wouldn't tell him anything. Ooh. Ooh. Who knows though? I mean, if he's the lead investigator, he's the one who has to compile all the information. But I think that's also a problem with this investigation, is that there was too many cooks. Everybody wanted the caller. They weren't really meshing their information, although there wasn't very much to mesh anyway. This is all hearsay anyway. We don't really know. I don't. And then, like I said, I think I can see the argument for being both a different attacker and the same attacker. But considering it was only a 4-month period of time and nothing happened, there wasn't any more attacks afterward, it just seems like there probably were the same attackers and they were trying to attack her, and he was trying to just change his MO up so that he wouldn't get caught. Alright. Turn this off so I don't burn myself. Ooh, the other night. Ooh, I burnt myself. You know, it's a... happens. It's not something like you can't, it's inevitable to hurt yourself, but it accidentally slipped. The burner slipped and I caught it in my fingers on accident. It was like a reflex, like catching a pin, and I caught it on the hot part, and that was not fun. Alrighty, I'm gonna get on to the painting part. I love painting. Oh, Steve, yeah. We're getting to the end of it. We still got to go over the suspects and the killer. It's himself, although we don't know who he is, but we got to go over this. So those were the investigators. And I also, my thoughts, and I'm not somebody who's, I don't know anything. I just like to talk it out of my ass. I have a BA in theater, but it's probably more like a BS. I'm very good at it sometimes. I think nowadays, I think because there are more databases and there are more things to just connect these days, I feel like they should have branched out and looked up to see if there was any cases in the surrounding areas that had some similar attacks or similar MOs, and that these days maybe he was, because it happened almost every 3 weeks, so maybe he was, maybe he was a truck driver who was going around, so maybe, and he was home during that time, so he killed when he was home, but maybe he also killed when he was out on the road, so maybe there were cases in similar delivery areas that, could connect other cases, and maybe he really didn't stop. Maybe he just left the town. And I know maybe some don't want to, and again, they do have a suspect, so that's probably why they didn't look outside their area. I mean, I know that there was probably some investigation to other things, but I feel like there might have been more attacks outside of that area that they could have connected, and that makes me think that maybe, I know it's probably, this is a long shot because there's a suspect in the Zodiac case as well, but serial killers have been known to go dormant for a while and then come back, change up their MO. Like, they might go after a sex worker, and they might go after sex workers, and then they come back later and they go after other, I know people don't like the term high risk, but lower risk person, because they feel more confident, or they want more attention. So maybe he went dormant for 20 years and then decided to come back out as a Zodiac. I mean, that's a stretch, I know, but it just, because the attacks are so similar, you never know. But, and the fact that it's a gunshot wound versus he did shoot people too, but he also stabbed people. So, I mean, it might not be him either. I'm not saying that it would have been. But I do think unless it really was Yule, which we'll get into, maybe there were attacks in other towns. With similar MOs. I don't know. But I think these days they probably would have been hopefully more talk between the two cities and maybe surrounding areas to see if there were any other possible attacks in the area that they might be able to get more evidence from. I'm probably going to want to go over some of this. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to turn it back on so it's hot. Just hopefully I won't burn myself. Yay! Okay. Now that I've rambled enough about my own theories on this case, let's go into the Phantom Killer himself. From the information that they have, what can we deduce that he might be? All right, I started painting already, so I wanted to bring out a little bit of color from the images. But we are all done with the burning of the image, so I got heart down here, and I did my heart similar to my heart that is part of my logo. I like to do the more anatomically correct heart versus the cute heart, although I like the cute hearts too, but I like it looks a little bit more gothic, and I like that feel. So here we go. I'm just going to add some color to the images a little bit, and then I'm probably going to also deepen the burns just a little bit as well. And then after it's all done, I'm going to seal it so that it doesn't crack or anything. And then we can hang it up. And I think I'm gonna hang it. I might move this and hang it here so that I can be part of all the rest of the videos too. Okay. So, like I said before, he didn't get his name, the Phantom Slayer or Phantom Killer, until after the Booker case. Because that's when they really started to connect everything. By that time, it's kind of, by that point, it's too late. There's only one more attack. They could have really been ramping up the investigation at that point, but nope. They missed their opportunity. They also call him a sex maniac, and there was, I mean, I know that there were a couple of assaults there, that the women were assaulted in 2 of the cases. They're not sure about the Polly-Ann Moore one, she wasn't sexually assaulted in the Starks case either, but they call him a sex maniac. I don't know if that is completely in his MO or not. I mean, it did happen in some of them, but I don't know if that was more. It was really more of a power control attack or an anger revenge attack. I guess maybe if he couldn't actually get it up, then maybe it was getting revenge, and that was his maniac. But I don't know. I ramble. I continue on. The first ones were not. The first attack was the only one where they could really get a description of the attacker, and even then they didn't really get a definitive one, and he was in a mask, so who's to say? I believe in the Stark attack, she didn't really get that good a look of him either, but I'm pretty sure he still had the mask on, but who knows? And it could have been a copycat from it as well. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go over these again. That's okay. So the MO, the modus operandi established for the killer was he attacked young couples in empty or private areas just outside city limits using a .32 caliber gun, although the caliber used in the Starks murder was a .22. .32 still believed was still believed by the majority of lawmen to have been used by the Phantom. He always attacked on the weekend and 3 weeks apart. And late at night. Dark. And if it's dark outside in the middle of nowhere, there's no lights, even if you get a look at him, even if he doesn't have a mask on, you're not getting a really good look at him anyway. The Texas Ranger Captain Gonzalez stated that he and his officers were dealing with a shrewd criminal who had left no stone unturned to conceal his identity and activities, and the murderer's efforts were both clever and baffling. He also stated that the man that they were hunting was a cunning individual who would go to all lengths to avoid apprehension. I mean, yeah, of course they're gonna. Most killers. I don't think there's many criminals who are gonna not try and get, or trying to get caught. I don't know if he was really that cunning, or if there really wasn't much they could do after the fact. There's not a lot of, there's just not a lot they could do. Even if he left evidence behind, there wasn't a lot they could do with that evidence anyway. So I don't really know how cunning he actually was. The fact that they just really couldn't do much with their investigation. The murder of at the murder scene of Virgil Starks, Sheriff Presley said, "This killer is the luckiest person I've ever known. No one sees him, hears him in time, or can identify him in any way." I mean, it's in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. People, you're probably not getting away. And then you're wearing a mask. So, yeah. I think that's why there's more unsolved at that point, and back then anyway, because it's like, at that point, if you can get away with a mask on, it's not really much that they can do as far as finding out your real identity, unless you leave a note behind with your freaking ID. Your wallet fell out. I mean, they did have some fingerprinting stuff, but they're looking at it by hand. It's not a computer system they can just upload it to and track identifying markers. So I don't know how cunning he actually was. The Texarkana Gazette stated, if one and the same man is responsible for the 5 murders and have been committed in the vicinity since March 24th, the Gazette feels that the public should know that the type of man with which the community is dealing with. With that in mind, the newspaper asked Dr. LaPella of the following interview. His interview was sought and given only in the interest of the public and the intent to not alarm unduly, not to alarm anyone, but to give everyone the benefit what is considered an expert opinion in mental behavior and sought out for the crimes. So they got him to, I want a little bit darker. Here we go. So, like I said, oh, that's nice. There it is. Profiling was in its infancy. There really wasn't much of a term for. There really wasn't much going on in terms of like a serial killer and like knowing what's going on. At that time, they're not really knowing brain, trying to do 2 things at once. So they bring in this doctor to do like a cursory basic profile. And it's not, and again, it's in its infancy, so they're really still learning about what they're talking about. So they don't really have that much information. So it's not, there we go. Yeah, it's not like, he brings that much to the table. And even if they did, it's not like you're doing that much with it. So, but even then, so he did believe that, so he created a profile, again, in its infancy, but he created a profile, and he believed that he did believe that the same person committed all 5 murders. He was somewhere in his mid-30s to 50s and motivated by sex drive and sadism, and he was clever and shrewd enough to not be apprehended. Although, like I said, I personally don't know how shrewd he would be. You didn't have to be that shrewd to not get caught. Just don't leave your wallet behind. If you're not leaving eyewitnesses, there's not much you really need to. You just need to make sure that you didn't leave your wallet behind, and I guess if your fingerprints are on file, don't leave your fingerprints. But again, I don't really know. It doesn't seem like you had to be that back then as shrewd. The sex part, yeah, I can see that. Although it was a gunshot wound, as bloody and awful as it's not as personal as like a stabbing would be. I mean, it is sadistic. I think the part that makes it more sadistic is the part where he tells them to like take off his pants and lie to them about saying that he doesn't really want to hurt them. And the taking off the pants is also to limit his ability to run away. But I think the fact that more of the fact that he like plays with them, that, I mean, this is only going off of the first attack, but assuming that they are all connected, the way that he plays with them and kind of like he calls him a liar after tells her to run away, but not in that direction, and then calls her a liar when he asks, why did you run away? So like that's sadistic and a power move, and so I can see that. I just don't know. I guess he's shrewd enough to not talk about it. Don't get cocky and talk about it to people. But as far as evidence or eyewitnesses, it seems like it didn't have to be that shrewd. I just think they might have just called him more shrewd than he was because they didn't want to admit that they couldn't find him. Ooh. Shots fired. No, I'm just kidding. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Shoot. I adjusted the font so it'd be easier to read, and then it threw off the way my format. According to the doctor's theories, the killer knew at all times what was being done in the investigation and knew that vacant roads were being patrolled, which is why he changed his MO for the farm to the house, which is what I said as well. He didn't want to be apprehended. And then he also believed the crimes were committed by he would divert He said that in many cases similar to this, the killer is never apprehended and in some instances will divert attention to other distant communities where it is believed other crimes are committed by a different individual, or else he will overcome the desire to kill and assault people. I don't agree that they're just gonna stop unless something happens. Like BTK stopped because he was getting older, and he almost that last case he realized when they fought back and he almost got caught, like, oh shit, I'm getting old. But I don't think that made him not want to kill. I just think he was trying to preserve himself from not getting caught, because if he really didn't want to kill anymore, he didn't want any more attention, he wouldn't have contacted the police afterward after so many years and then finally got himself caught. So I don't think people that are attacking like that are ever going to stop. I just think something happens maybe that prevented him from doing it again. But like I said, this profile was done in 46, at the infancy of what they're talking about, so they're still learning the process. He said that the murderer was probably not a Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde character, that he could be leading a normal life and preparing to be a good citizen. He also said the killer was probably not a veteran, because if he did serve in the armed forces for a year, his maniacal tendencies would be apparent. I don't know if I agree with that either. That could, he could. There are theories that it was a veteran, and that maybe he was caught in some kind of episode. But the suspects that are they end up not being, but they end up being ruled out. But him saying that they weren't apparent, yeah, I mean they could be apparent while they're there if he had them before he went in. But what if the trauma, the tendencies and the trauma came from the combat itself? So that could have changed him. So that who's just like, I don't agree with that for sure. And then he stated that the murderer was not necessarily a resident of the area, despite his knowledge of all of it. All of it's actually deep planning. I mean, did he pick those streets? Did he did he pick his victims beforehand and follow them? Or did he happen upon them in lovers' lanes and he was just looking for, there was a opportunity because he found them on the lane? I could see how maybe the Virgil's house was picked beforehand, but maybe if he found his victims and then followed them that night, I could see that. There's arguments, you could say an argument on either side. And then the police did not scare him away, although if it really wasn't Yule, it did scare him away from that area, so maybe he was just killing in a different area. He says this man is extremely dangerous. He works alone and no one knows what he is doing because he tells no one. So maybe he's a loner, or maybe he does have a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality. All right. Whew. Getting through this. So much to talk about. I gotta zoom this back in. There we go. So Miller County Sheriff's Department was notified minutes after. So we're just talking about some of the investigation points. This point is during the Starks case. There's kind of like conflicting information about how he was, Virgil Stark was found. They said he was slumped in the chair, the blood-soaked chair, that the chair had caught on fire because of the electric heating pad, and the smoke was filling the room and coming up between his legs, but he was not on fire because he was not burned because he had fallen on the floor at that time. By that time. Oh no! Can I reach it? Can I reach it? My notes are gonna leave. I gotta fix this. Hold on. Hi everybody, and sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled programming of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders and the Town That Dreaded Sundown here on Crafts and Crimes. But as I was editing, I realized that there was just far too much information to put into one video, so I'm going to split it up into two. So this will conclude part 1 of Crafts and Crimes, Texarkana Moonlight Murders, and the Town That Dreaded Sundown. So here's my little wrap up. You can find out all the information for From the Heart Gifts on our website, From the Heart Personalized Gifts. You can check us out on Instagram, From the Heart Personalized Gifts, and as well as Facebook under the same name. You can check out all of that, and then pictures from this week's episode will also be on Instagram. And then check back for part 2 of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders and the Town That Dreaded Sundown. See you next time.